Hey guys, how's it going? Jordan Locke here. So today I wanted to speak a bit about the Nolan Wells disappearance. You guys have probably heard about this situation. It's been all over the news recently. It just happened a month ago, around a month ago, July 4th weekend in Mississippi. And I'm sure you've heard about this because it has been causing a lot of controversy. It's a very polarizing situation for a number of different reasons, which we'll get into. But for those of you who are not familiar with this case, I just wanted to touch on the facts surrounding the case. So, long story short, Nolan Wells is an 18-year-old guy who went out drinking and partying with his friends on July 4th. And by the end of July 4th, this man would end up missing. Nobody would know where Nolan is. Nolan's body actually turned up a few days later, but the circumstances surrounding how Nolan died are very mysterious and very strange, to say the least. So we're going to get into all the details surrounding the circumstances of his death, but before that, let's talk a bit about the facts of what happened that day. So, Nolan Wells is an 18-year-old guy who had recently graduated high school in Mississippi. The name of the town specifically was Ocean Springs, Mississippi. On July 4th weekend, Nolan and his friends decide to go out drinking to a popular party destination off of the coast of Mississippi called Horn Island. Now, Horn Island is a long, skinny island. It's about 10 miles off the coast of Mississippi, and there's really nothing on the island. You can't get there by car. You have to take a boat there, and it's really just a long strip of sand and bushes, essentially. So what happens is on holidays, people will go out to this island, they'll take their boats out there, they'll drink, they'll party, they'll listen to music, and there are hundreds of people out there, if not thousands of people on any given holiday. July 4th being one of the largest holidays that people go out to this island called Horn Island. So, on this particular July 4th, 2026, Nolan and his friends decide to go out to Horn Island to celebrate graduating high school and going off to college. Nolan ends up leaving on one of his friends' boats, and they take the trip out to Horn Island. They get out there in the morning, and they immediately start drinking. They're partying, they're listening to music. Nolan is talking to a girl who had also gone out to Horn Island named Katie. And he ends up spending a lot of time with this girl, Katie. They snuggle, they talk. I don't know what else they did. It's really not known. And this is all according to Nolan's friends. So Nolan's friends said that Nolan spent a bunch of time snuggling with Katie and speaking with Katie, hanging out with Katie until the afternoon. Now, on the afternoon of July 4th, the friends who Nolan went to Horn Island with reported that they were having some trouble with their boat and they had to head off of the island and head back to the mainland. This was around 3 to 4 p.m. in the afternoon. Nolan came to Horn Island with these friends, but according to these friends, Nolan didn't want to go back home with them because he wanted to stay and talk to Katie on Horn Island.
You guys get ready to leave out of there, getting towed out.
Yeah.
And then where's Nolan in this situation?
Well, the last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock. And Nolan was cradling a girl in his arms, Katie. Nolan was sitting by the boat with that Katie girl, and my buddy yelled for Nolan, get on the boat. We're leaving. The boat's having issues. And no, he didn't say that, but he was panicking. Nolan, get the F on the boat.
And so these friends, according to them, ended up leaving Horn Island and developing boat issues. They called a towing service and reported to the towing service that their boat was having issues and that they needed a tow and that they were sinking. And then in the middle of the call, they cancel the tow and end up bringing the boat back to the mainland.
Tow Assistance, Vicky speaking. How can I help you?
Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our bilge pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can y'all please come? We have a membership.
All right, of course. How far is the water coming up, sir? Can you give me a description? Ankles? Hello?
Hey.
Yes. How far is the water coming up, sir?
It's coming up. We're just sinking. I don't know. We're going down now.
Now, all of this time, Nolan is purportedly back on the island speaking with Katie. We don't know much of what happened after that afternoon, but what we do know is by that evening around 7 or 8 o'clock, nobody knows what happened to Nolan. Nolan had literally just disappeared off of the face of the earth. Katie didn't know what happened to him. Nolan's friends didn't know what happened to him. And his body ended up turning up a few days later on the coast of Horn Island. Now, some people say that his body washed ashore. Some people say that he got really drunk and he may have drowned and that the rip currents are very strong in that area. He may have been caught in a rip current and possibly drowned, and his body ended up being dragged back to shore by the currents. I think that this is an absolutely ridiculous and preposterous statement because there were thousands of people on that island that day. So you're telling me out of the thousands of people who were on that island partying and drinking, I might add, it was all high schoolers, college people, and people who were older than that, all partying and drinking. Out of the thousands of people on that island, the only person who succumbed to drowning was Nolan Wells? Of everyone on that island? That's ridiculous. Furthermore, if Nolan succumbed to drowning and he died on the island, there were thousands of people there. There was no way that nobody would have seen what was happening. I know I described it earlier, but there is no place to hide on Horn Island. It's literally just a sandbar in the middle of the ocean with a couple of bushes. And there are thousands of people. According to Nolan's friend, there were over 1,000 people there that day. Had something happened to Nolan, people would have seen whatever happened to him, and there would have been witnesses. However, where we are right now is somehow nobody witnessed anything happen to Nolan, yet somehow his body turns up a few days later on shore at Horn Island. So those are the facts surrounding the situation. Now, this case has been a very polarizing case for a number of different reasons. The first reason is the race of the people involved. Nolan Wells is an 18-year-old black guy, and most of Nolan's friends are white guys. And the people who Nolan rode out with on a boat were mostly white. They were about 90% white. There were a couple of other black guys who were involved, but 90% of the friends who went out there were white. The reason why race has been a very polarizing topic in this situation is because of the way the case has been handled so far. As soon as Nolan was reported missing, the governor got on TV, and I think this is probably about a day or two after Nolan was reported missing. The governor got on television and said there was no reason to suspect foul play. Furthermore, one of the mothers of one of the friends of Nolan, who happens to be a judge in the area, made a Facebook post essentially exonerating her family, saying that her and her husband were not on the island and that they had nothing to do with what happened to Nolan, and that they send condolences to Nolan's family. Now, this is a very odd thing for a judge to do, because at this time, this case was an open case, and the case still is an open case. There's an ongoing investigation. It's very odd that the judge became so defensive right away and decided to go on Facebook and make a public statement regarding what was happening here. The subject of race came up because there didn't really seem to be much urgency when looking for Nolan Wells and investigating Nolan Wells. Nolan's mother stated in a press conference that when she found out that Nolan was missing, she contacted the police, and the police met her at midnight in a McDonald's parking lot. This is a few hours after she had contacted police to let them know that her 18-year-old son was missing. The other point that makes this such a controversial topic is because of where it happened, right? So as we discussed, this happened in the state of Mississippi. Now, as everybody who's watching this video right now is aware, Mississippi has a bit of a history when it comes to racial tension. Mississippi is the most racist state in the entire country in terms of the number of murders that have happened that have been racially motivated. And this has been happening throughout the centuries. However, we're not just talking about ancient history or even relatively recent history with slavery. Even recently, within the 2000s, there have been many racially motivated murders in Mississippi. The latest having been a 21-year-old black guy who was found hanging from a tree and beaten in Mississippi last fall of 2025. So Mississippi has a track record of being not the greatest when it comes to racial relations and racial bias. And this particular crime has happened in Mississippi. So therefore, if you put two and two together, there is rightfully and fairly a lot of suspicion regarding the death of Nolan Wells, who happened to be one of the only black guys on this island. There were other black people there, but the vast majority of people who were partying on the island that day were white. So there happens to be a lot of suspicion around how, if the majority of the people who were partying on that island that day were white, how is it that one of the only black people who was on the island turned up dead? Now, a lot of the rhetoric online surrounding this case has been very extreme, right? So essentially, most people are divided into two camps when it comes to this case. And both camps are wrong as far as I'm concerned, and I'm going to get into the reasons why. The first camp are the people who hear about this situation and they automatically assume that Nolan was murdered. We don't have the evidence to support the fact that Nolan was murdered by anybody, so it's wrong to jump to that conclusion. We just don't have the evidence. The entire situation has been very suspicious, definitely. There are many people who, because of Nolan's race, automatically assume that this was also a racist situation and that Nolan was murdered because of his race, which once again is the wrong conclusion to jump to because we don't have the facts to support that. So I am of the opinion that it is absolutely wrong to hear about the situation and automatically deduce that Nolan was murdered by racist people. Yes, it happened in Mississippi, where there is tons of racism. Yes, he was one of the only black people on the island. Yes, the parties involved have been acting very suspicious since Nolan's murder. However, it is absolutely wrong to jump to the conclusion that this was 100% without a doubt a racist situation. Now, there's another extreme that is just as preposterous and ridiculous as that extreme. And this extreme are the people who are online who are telling everyone that they just know without a doubt, with 100% certainty, that Nolan's death was an accident and there could be no way that there was foul play involved in his death. That is equally ridiculous. If you were not there and you didn't witness what happened, there is no way to be certain that Nolan's death was an accident. Now, you'll notice that a lot of these people who are saying that there is a 100% chance that Nolan's death was an accident and he just happened to drown are the same people who, instead of questioning all the suspicions surrounding this case, are villainizing Nolan's mother, villainizing the lawyers who are trying to get details and information regarding this mysterious disappearance and then subsequent death. They're also the same people who are calling Crump and Al Sharpton and the NAACP and people like that race baiters, right? It's always the same exact narrative. With this extreme narrative of the situation, these people go into a situation, they see the race, they see the fact that the victim is black and that the people who were last with Nolan were white, and automatically, right away, they know exactly what happened. They already know who they want to support. Clearly, Nolan's death was an accident, and very clearly, Nolan's friends had nothing to do with it. It is an absolutely ridiculous take, and it is even more ridiculous to get upset that some people are suspicious of the fact that there could be race involved, given the history of the place that this took place, right? A rational person, an objective person, will step back and say, okay, this took place in Mississippi. The place was probably the worst history in the country when it comes to racial relations and race-motivated murders. It is within reason for anyone with common sense to at least suspect or be suspicious of the fact that there could have been some element of race involved. Now, I personally don't think that this had anything to do with Nolan's race. I do believe that either foul play was involved or there was an accident and Nolan's friends are trying to cover up the accident. That's what my opinion is. I don't think that his race was involved because these people knew Nolan and they went to school with Nolan. However, it is absolutely ridiculous to not be able to see that this situation happening in Mississippi is going to raise some alarms and be at least somewhat suspicious to some people. Now, another problem that I have with this case is that a lot of people are looking at this as a white and black situation. As in, if you're white, you're automatically going to be on the side of Nolan's friends who are saying that they had nothing to do with the situation. And if you're black, you're automatically going to be on the side of Nolan, who was the victim who passed away. I reject that idea. I think that it's ridiculous to draw lines based on race. And I'll tell you why I think that. There are plenty of white people who see what I see in the narrative of Nolan's friends and who can see the inconsistencies of the narrative of Nolan's friends when they say that they left Nolan on the island to speak with Katie and then never heard from Nolan again. There are many white people online who see the exact same thing, who are questioning the narrative of Nolan's friends and saying, what are you talking about? The stuff that you're saying doesn't make any sense. And we're going to get into the narrative in a little bit. But it's not a racial thing because many white people are questioning the narrative of Nolan's friends also. On the flip side, you have black people who are supporting Nolan's friends and demonizing and villainizing Nolan's mother, the mother of the victim who wants to get answers. A notable person who falls into this category is a YouTuber named Officer Tatum. Now, Officer Tatum has been doing interviews with Nolan's friends. These interviews seem to be happening with the narrative that Nolan's friends are completely innocent, they had absolutely nothing to do with Nolan's disappearance, and it's very clear that Officer Tatum, who happens to be a black ex-police officer in Mississippi, is going into this situation with a predetermined narrative and an agenda. If you take a step back and look at Officer Tatum's YouTube channel, you'll see that Officer Tatum is a MAGA representative despite being black. In other words, he is voting and supporting the party who hates his existence and who wants to see him gone and blames him for all the problems that we have in this country. And it's actually a very curious thing because when you go through the comments of his videos, you'll see people saying racist things about the things that he's pointing out in his videos. So it's like he's trying to cater and suck up to people who absolutely hate his guts. So it's a very sad situation to see Officer Tatum and the agenda that he's pushing, knowing that the vast majority of people who watch him watch him because of the color of his skin. But that's kind of a separate topic that we'll talk about at another point. The point is that Officer Tatum is a black guy who is going with the narrative that obviously nothing nefarious happened to Nolan Wells, and this was very clearly an accident. So, my point is this is not a white and black thing. There are many YouTubers who are white, such as Nancy Grace, who are going through and asking really tough questions and questioning the narrative of Nolan's friends as to how they could not have known what happened to Nolan. And there are black people, such as Officer Tatum, who are supporting Nolan's friends and are saying that there's absolutely no way that there could be foul play involved with Nolan. Okay, so this brings me to the narrative of Nolan's friends and the questions that I have with the narrative of Nolan's friends. Now, for the record, I am of the opinion, like I've stated before, that I don't believe that race was involved in this death. I do believe that either foul play happened or Nolan succumbed to an accident and his friends are trying to cover it up somehow. That's what I'm gathering from the interviews that Nolan's friends are giving for lots of different reasons. The first reason is that Nolan's friend Warren, okay, you'll hear the name Warren come up quite a bit. Warren Hudson is a person who, according to him, was Nolan's best friend and brother. He says this in the interview with Officer Tatum, that him and Nolan were best friends and they were brothers and they were inseparable and they hung out multiple times a week. And while I do believe that Nolan and Warren were friends, there is no evidence to support the fact that they were best friends and brother. In fact, there is more evidence to support the fact that they were casual friends as opposed to best friends and brothers. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Okay, guys, so now we get to the inconsistencies surrounding the story and why there's so much controversy online surrounding the disappearance and death of Nolan Wells. According to Nolan Wells' friends, Nolan went to the island like we discussed, partied with them all day, and then when the friends developed boat issues, they had to leave July 4th around the afternoon, around 3 or 4 p.m. And so they said they have stated multiple times in interviews that Nolan stated that he wanted to stay on the island and speak with Katie, who was a girl that he had been spending all of his time with. And so they apparently left Nolan on the island and then went back to the mainland. While they were on the way to the mainland, they were saying that they developed more boat issues, that the boat was going to sink, and that they called a towing company to potentially come and tow the boat. However, in the middle of this call, and the call was recorded, the call is on YouTube, you can find it. I'll place a link to the call below. In the middle of this call, they stated that they no longer needed a tow, and they went back to the mainland themselves. Now, according to Warren Hudson, who is someone who describes himself as Nolan's best friend and brother, Warren states that he spoke with Katie after they got back that day, and Katie stated that once they took the boat, left Horn Island, and went back to the mainland, that Nolan left Katie, and she didn't see Katie all day. So Warren is telling us, on the one hand, that Nolan wanted to stay on the island and didn't come back with them because he wanted to stay and talk to Katie. But then Warren is also saying that according to Katie and the text message conversation that they had, as soon as they left the island, Nolan left Katie and she didn't see him again. This is a big problem, right? So this is a huge inconsistency. Why would Nolan tell them that he was going to stay and talk to Katie and then leave her as soon as they leave the island? That makes zero sense. That makes absolutely no sense. Also, if these people were such good friends with Nolan, how did they not know who he was going to go home with? That's another problem that I have. The other issue is that Nolan's friends came back to the mainland and they had with them Nolan's phone, right? So what we are to believe is that Nolan's friends left. They took Nolan's phone with them, but then left Nolan on the island. Nolan's phone was the only means that Nolan had to communicate with anybody, either on the island or when he got back to the mainland. And there's been a lot of talk about how there's no service on the island. Nolan's friend debunked that, and Nolan's friend said that there actually is service on the island. It can be spotty in certain areas, but you can absolutely use your phone on the island. So why would they leave with Nolan's only means of communication? How do we know that Warren and Nolan's friends had Nolan's phone? Because Nolan's mother did a press conference and said that she used a tracking device or a tracking app called Life 360 on Nolan's phone, who led her back to Nolan's friend's house. That's how she found out that they had his phone. They didn't volunteer Nolan's phone to Nolan's mother or father. Nolan's parents had to track the phone down, and that's when they realized that the phone was at the friend's house. The other problem that I have is that Nolan's father states that when he got to the friend's house that night, when it was already determined that Nolan had been missing, that the friends had been acting extremely evasive, right? These are people who call themselves Nolan's friends. So if they were Nolan's friends, and at this point in time, it was well known that Nolan was missing, you'd think that they'd go out and go to Nolan's parents and try to help Nolan's parents try to find out what happened to Nolan. Instead of that happening, Nolan's parents had to go to them because their tracking app led them to the house. And Nolan's father said they were acting extremely evasive and acting like they didn't want to speak with him and kind of hiding from him and not really talking with him. Nolan's father went to the house to get Nolan's keys, and Nolan's friends told Nolan's father that they had no idea where his keys were. Another girl called shortly after and stated that she knew exactly where Nolan's keys were and that they were on top of an Xbox that they had been playing before they left for the island that morning. I find it very odd that the friends didn't know that Nolan's keys were on top of the Xbox, but yet somehow this girl who was at the house with him somehow knew that Nolan's keys were on the Xbox. That strikes me as somewhat suspicious. The other problematic part for me is, like we talked about, instead of helping Nolan's parents to try to find out where Nolan was, giving them the phone, and I mean volunteering the phone to Nolan's parents, not having the parents have to come to you because they tracked the phone to your house. Instead of volunteering Nolan's phone so that maybe they can find some clues in Nolan's phone as to what happened to him, Nolan's parents showed up to the house. Nolan's friends brought out Nolan's phone, gave it to his father, and then they went into the house, according to Nolan's father, and hid in there until the police showed up. They left Nolan's father standing on the driveway by himself until the police showed up. This is not behavior of a good friend or a friend, period, let alone a best friend. So this is another inconsistency. On the one hand, Warren states that he is Nolan's best friend and brother. But then on the other hand, when Nolan's parents show up to get his keys and his phone, they don't volunteer the phone. Instead, they act extremely evasive and hide in the house until the police show up. What's even more suspicious is that shortly after this, Nolan's friends lawyer up. Now, their narrative is that they were getting so many threats online that they absolutely had to lawyer up. But once again, this is someone who you guys describe as your friend. So you can see how this behavior is extremely alarming and suspicious. So at the end of the day, what do we have? We have Warren and Nolan's friends stating that they left the island around 3 or 4 p.m. when their boats started developing issues and that they had not heard from Nolan since then. On the other hand, you have Katie, who is a girl who Nolan was talking to, stating that Katie told her that she was going back with the same friends that he came to Horn Island with. So this is another inconsistency and another problem that I have with Warren's story. Warren is telling people in interviews that Nolan told him that he was going to stay on the island to speak with Katie and that he was going to get a ride back on a different boat later that day. But Katie, the girl who he was talking to, has stated and has insisted during this entire situation that Nolan told her that he was going back with the same friends that he came to the island with, right? So we have two different stories here that cannot both be true. Either Nolan said to Katie that he was going back to the mainland with his friends, the same friends he came with, or Nolan told Warren and the other friends that he was going to stay with Katie and hang out on the island and go back with other friends. So who's lying here? Is Katie lying, or is Warren and Warren's friends, are they lying? Did Nolan want to come back with the friends, or did Nolan want to stay on the island and go back with someone else? And if this was such a close-knit group of friends, how did Warren not know the friends that Nolan was going to go back with later? If Nolan indeed went to Warren and said, hey guys, I'm going to stay on the island for a bit, I'm going to speak with Katie, and I'm going to head back later on. You'd think that Nolan would at the very least tell Warren who he was going back with. Or if Warren was really such good friends with Nolan, you'd think that Warren would be like, okay, yeah, man, no problem. Who are you going to go back with? By the way, here's your phone. I know you're going to have to call people to get a ride back. So here's your phone. We'll see you guys later. But that's not what happened. And so while none of us know exactly what happened in this situation, the facts are still out there. The investigation is pending. There are too many inconsistencies with the story of Nolan's friends, Warren in particular, for that narrative to be completely solid. There are problems with the story that just don't add up. So, since this has happened, there have been 2 autopsies done on Nolan Wells' body. The first autopsy, the results have not been released because there is now a grand jury involved. So the results have been sealed until the grand jury releases their findings. The second autopsy was done by an independent party in Washington, D.C., and this was done at the behest of Nolan's parents because they, quite frankly, didn't trust law enforcement in Mississippi to handle this autopsy fairly, which, to be 100% honest with you, I don't blame them one bit. Given Mississippi's history, given the fact that one of the friends of Nolan, Warren's stepmother, is a judge in the area, and we all know how nepotism works in places like Mississippi, I don't blame her that she wanted to have an independent autopsy done. So the second autopsy was done, and the results of this autopsy were inconclusive, meaning they were not able to determine that foul play was involved, but they also were not able to determine that Nolan's death was just an accident. Now, they did find some marking and bruising on the back of Nolan's head, which I find to be very odd and suspicious. The other thing about the autopsy is that there were neck bones, fragments of neck bones that were removed from Nolan Wells' body in the first autopsy. The medical examiners who did the second autopsy requested those bone fragments from the people who did the first autopsy, but they wouldn't send the bone fragments, and as of today have still not sent those bone fragments to the second medical examiners doing the second autopsy. Now, I find this very suspicious for a couple of different reasons. Number one, bone fragments, according to medical examiners who have taken a look at this case, bone fragments are only removed when there is suspicion of an injury that has taken place around the neck area. So if the people who did the first autopsy are removing bone fragments around the neck, that means there's at least some suspicion that something happened to Nolan's neck, number one. Number two, if there's suspicion that something happened to Nolan's neck, why did you not send those bone fragments to the second medical examiner who wanted to do another autopsy, who wanted to conduct the independent autopsy? And why have those bone fragments still not been sent to the second medical examiner? So that's where we are right now with this case. There has been lots of information that has come out since then. A call has just been released, and this call was Nolan's friends calling a boat towing company when their boat developed issues and they believed that they were going to sink. They called this tow company, and this tow company was getting ready to go out there and give them a tow, and then somehow in the middle of the call, they decide that they don't need the towing company anymore. And the audio is out there. You can listen to the audio. It's on YouTube. There's a lot of speculation as to what's being said behind the scenes in the background while the person is speaking with the towing company. Some people say they can hear people yelling Nolan's name in the background. I personally cannot hear that. I'm not saying that they're not yelling Nolan's name, and I'm not saying that they are yelling Nolan's name. I personally cannot hear that. However, I did listen to the phone call, and what I did notice is that somebody yells, "Get up," and they say, "Get the F up," and then the phone gets muted. And it's muted for a good 5, 6, 7 seconds, and then the person gets back on the phone. So during this conversation with the towing company, Nolan's friends are talking very loudly, and they sound very frantic about something happening in the background. Someone yells, "Get up," and then the phone is muted. What I believe happened is that the person who was on the phone with the towing company told the friends to keep their voices down because they were saying something that could possibly be overheard on the phone call. Obviously, it's a towing company, and this is an emergency, so clearly the phone call is going to be recorded. And then when the phone is unmuted and the person gets back on the phone, suddenly everyone is a lot more quiet. And for the duration of the phone call, everybody is extremely quiet. So there are many reasons as to why a lot of people, including myself, have a lot of questions surrounding this situation, right? An 18-year-old guy died, and we need to find out how this guy died. Could it have been an accident? It absolutely could have been an accident. Could there also have been foul play involved? Absolutely, there could have been foul play involved. And to insist without a doubt that it's one or the other without having any supporting evidence is absolutely ridiculous. We still don't know what happened yet. But as far as I'm concerned, the story of the friends is just not adding up. There are too many inconsistencies, just so many strange things that they're saying happened that wouldn't have happened if they were truly friends with Nolan. Their behavior is not consistent with the behavior of friends of someone who just passed away. And there are just too many questions surrounding this situation. So I'm going to keep on this investigation. I'm going to be bringing you updates as things come out. I truly want to make sure that justice is served. Nolan needs to rest in peace, and we need to find out what exactly happened to him. Nolan's family deserves peace, and Nolan's family deserves to know what happened to their son. They do not deserve the villainization and the demonization that they're getting from all of the people out there who have this agenda that Nolan's friends can do no wrong, and all of the wrong is on Nolan's side of this coin, with Nolan's parents and Nolan's lawyers Typically, these people are far-right MAGA people who already went into this with a specific agenda in mind. So I want to see justice served in this situation, as I'm sure you want to see justice served. An 18-year-old lost her life way too young. We need to find out what happened to this guy. I'm going to be bringing you updates as they come out, and I would encourage you to look at information on this case, surrounding this case. There are lots of things that just seem very odd, doesn't really add up. This young man disappeared and showed up dead 2 days later. We need to find out exactly what happened to Nolan Wells. Like I said, guys, I'll be staying on this case. I'll be bringing you updates as they come out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.